Hi, this is JFK assassination researcher Richard Hooke, and as we are approaching November 22nd, 2018, I just wanted to give a little video here telling you something about my background and the research that I found in related to the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, I actually this began for me about 10 years ago, where my son Brett, who was about 13 at the time, this is Brett here, right here, and his brother Scott. This is Brett at the auto show at the Moscone Center in San Francisco. But he's a little older here. But when he was about 13, he came to me. We had just watched the movie JFK. He'd rented it to watch for school, and that we watched it. And then he came back into the family room later that night, and he said, "Dad, I need to talk to you for a minute." And he said, "I just wanted to tell you that I really don't think Lee Oswald shot anybody at all." And I said, "Well, it's possible he didn't. They never were able to prove that he did." And then Brett started to walk away, and he turned around and he said, "No, you don't understand. He definitely didn't shoot anybody. There's no question. He didn't shoot anybody." I said, "Okay, Brett. I'll look into it again. I used to read about it a lot. I had some books in the 80s and 90s. This was about 2009 or so when this happened with Brett, but." I said I repurchased some of the books I'm going to go use this time, but I'll buy a few of them and look into it again and get back to you and let you know what I think about it. And the first book I bought when I was researching was On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. I ordered it from Amazon for 99 cents, and I got started again. And actually, after about a year, I went back to my son Brett and I said, "Brett, you were right. My conclusion is Lee Oswald never shot anybody at all and never even fired any shots." And and then Brett said, "Well, now, Dad, now that you know that, what are you going to do about it?" And that took me back again. I thought it was over, that I'd finally answered his question. But I said, I said, "I don't know, Brett. I don't know." This is how it started for me. I kept researching after Brett's initial question in my year of research on Oswald, and I found out that Oswald didn't shoot anybody. And I discovered basically a series of revelations, one after another. It just kept going all the way up to now. And actually within this past couple of months, JFK researcher Rachel White from the United Kingdom, who I've done a recent book with called Takedown, about the assassination with Rachel. It's available on Amazon. We've discovered a couple of new stunning revelations, actually, but I just wanted to go over a few today, just to review ones that I believe all to be true. And these are things that I discovered in my research over the past 10 years into the assassination of President Kennedy. I thought this might be of interest to some of you. This morning, I was just listing these out of ones that I thought definitely I feel are true, which weren't obvious in the beginning, but now they seem like givens. So the whole situation has changed a tremendous amount. We really do know an awful lot now in 2018, a tremendous amount. We have the luxury of all the great researchers before us, such as Judge Jim Garrison. There's so many of them. I'm not going to list them all off, but we have the luxury of all of their hard work and standing on their shoulders. So we really know a lot. And I just wanted to list off some of them here for you. They've all been an awakening for me. This series of revelations. It's basically a flood. Basically an awakening for me of a flood of Illuminati, Zionist deep state propaganda lies, which have been flooded upon the American people in the world. And I've gradually been able to fight my way through these things. And so here, I'm just going to list off some of them. I thought it might be of interest to you. I mean, number one, Lee Oswald was Altkin 6 doorman when President Kennedy was being shot. He was down on the first floor, and there he is right there. And I proved it in one of my books, The Man with the Mona Lisa Smile, with 77 points a match to Oswald here, to pictures of him in the Dallas police station after he was arrested at the Texas Theater later. So this is Oswald here in the doorway. There's no question about it. So he fired no shots at all, not a warning shot, not any shots. And the guy that they said this was, Billy Lovelady, is the guy on the opposite side of the doorway with his hands over his head. So they were in the doorway at the same time, Oswald and Lovelady. Okay, but this is Oswald. He's in the doorway. And actually, Oswald, he was a CIA O&I agent and an FBI informant. That's what he was. And he was involved in the conspiracy, and they wanted him to shoot, but he didn't. And he didn't shoot at all, and he tried to warn us that the assassination was going to happen. He really didn't want President Kennedy to be killed. And but it was to no avail. It went ahead, even though Lee didn't shoot. So basically, yeah, Lovelady was Black Hole Man with the hands overhead. We've discovered that. Another thing there's not any question is Lee Oswald was picked up at 12:40 after the shooting at 12:30 when JFK was shot in front of the TSBD by a Nash Rambler station wagon that was given to the Oswalds by Ruth Payne. It wasn't her main station wagon, but it was supplied by Clay Shaw from New Orleans to Ruth Payne, who let the Oswalds have it. It was light green, and Lee Oswald drove it to work that morning, and then he was picked up in front of the TSBD at 12:40 by another driver who picked up a couple of other shooters, actually Mac Wallace and Frank Sturgis also. Basically, that means Oswald was picked up at 12:40, so his purported exit from the plaza by bus and cab, the official line, is 100% bullshit. It didn't happen at all. He can't be in two places at one time. So he was picked up by a station wagon, witnessed by Dallas Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig and a couple of other people at 12:40. So the entire bus and cab ride to get to Oak Cliff was bullshit, the whole thing. So that was very stunning to me to discover, because I'd been reading about this bus and cab ride for basically years, and it turns out the entire thing is concocted by the CIA asset attorneys. So another thing I discovered is that in Altkin 6, actually, if you blow up the whole version of the Altkin 6 photo, it shows President Kennedy shot and Oswald in the doorway. You can see Danny Arce with a walkie-talkie next to Johnny Roselli down in front of the Daltex building. So we discovered that also. Danny Arce was a communications man talking to Ruth Ann Martinez up on the 6th floor, who was assisting Malcolm Wallace. Another revelation that I'm convinced was true without any doubt is Roscoe White was the badge man shooter in front of the northern picket fence. Roscoe White was planted in the Dallas PD on October 7th for the purpose of shooting President Kennedy. He was in the Dallas PD. He was also CIA and O&I, Roscoe White. So he was the badge man shooter, and he was assisted by J.D. Tippit, who was a spotter standing right next to the badge man. Tippit's the taller guy. And the guy shooting was Roscoe. I don't believe J.D. shot. I think he was just the spotter there. Okay, and actually Roscoe, as he said in his journal, were discovered by his son Ricky White, hit JFK in the throat through the wood freeway sign busted through the wood and went into JFK's throat, and then afterward he shot JFK a second time in the head. That was Roscoe. My conclusion about Alkin 6, there's been many researchers who have researched it, many of them friends of mine, but my conclusion on it is it was not altered. Okay, despite, I'm not going to mention any names of any other researchers. I'm not trying to discredit or embarrass anybody, but I don't feel it was altered. And the reason I don't is because if they altered it, the first thing they would have done is take Oswald out of it. All they had to do was black him out, and then they could have said, well, he was upstairs doing the shooting, and nobody could have said much. But the bottom line is, he's right there. So they didn't black him out at all. He's 100% there. Okay, so I don't feel there was any alterations. They're done. He's 100% there, Oswald in Alkin 6. It's his clothing, his face, his hairline, the whole bit. He's all there, 100%. So it wasn't altered, or they would have done something about that. The other thing we found is that Malcolm Wallace was up on the 6th floor, so he was a real 6th floor shooter. He was on the opposite end of the floor from the sniper's nest, and Oswald was up there until the last few minutes. And then when Wallace went to the other end of the floor with his communications lady, Ruth Ann Martinez, and the other shooter up there, Loy Factor, Lee Oswald bailed. He put down a couple shells out of his pocket and bailed and went down into the doorway on the 1st floor. And he did get photographed by Ike Alkins, caught in the back of the photograph of JFK. So Wallace was the real 6th floor shooter. He fired 2 shots, at least, I think 2 for sure. Well, he hit JFK in the back, and then he also hit Conley in the back. These were separate shots. Okay, Mac Wallace did that from the TSPD 6th floor. Okay, the first shot that he hit JFK in the back came down at an angle and slammed into his spine and stopped right there. And the shot that he hit Conley with after that went through Conley's right back, came out his chest, went through his right wrist and into his left thigh. So it was coming down at an angle and got Conley. Wallace did that, okay? He was assisted by Loy Factor, who fired, actually Loy Factor fired the first shot into the street. It sparked and sounded like a firecracker crack, but didn't hit anybody. That was Factor, I believe. And then Ruth Ann was up there with a walkie-talkie calling the shots, and Wallace did those other 2 shots. Okay, another conclusion I come to is there was no Oswald double that looked exactly like Oswald, although he was impersonated on occasion. Okay, I don't believe there's anybody who looked just like Lee. There was any clone or any undiscovered brother. Bew Wesley Frazier, his tale of Oswald riding in with him in the car that morning with a package is 100% BS. Oswald was not even in the car. We know that now, so there wasn't any package at all. So in the first tip-off on Frazier is that he still says, TSPD employee Bew Wesley Frazier, he still says that Alkin 6 doorman is Lovelady when it's obviously Oswald, and he was Oswald's buddy, Frazier, so he knows that's Lee. He knew this shirt, the whole bit, but he still says it's Lovelady. So obviously, when I started to realize that, I started to realize, well, what else is Frazier lying about? Because that's a big deal. Well, it turns out, through my research, I've come to the conclusion he didn't. Oswald drove the National Rambler wagon into the plaza that morning. And in our book Takedown, I have multiple sightings of Oswald that night. He was actually, Oswald was out of Ruth Payne's in Irving the previous night by 9 p.m. So he didn't even spend the night there. So Ruth Payne's tale is all a lie. Oswald was out the previous night. Okay, he didn't leave the next morning through the garage, and he didn't go over to Frazier's down the street with his rifle. That didn't happen. All of that is a lie. Oswald was out the previous night and drove to the plaza the next morning. So the Paynes, Bew Wesley Frazier, and his sister Linnie Mae Randall, that's all concocted by Ruth Payne, the Fraziers. it didn't happen with the ride with Oswald to the TSBD with a package. That didn't happen. Okay. And actually, Oswald he drove that Nash Rambler to the plaza. It was used as a pickup wagon after the assassination. It picked up Frank Sturgis in the rail yard. They had a Latino driver. It picked up Malcolm Wallace over on Record Street, and they circled back and got Oswald. So that the wagon that Oswald drove in was used as a assassination pickup wagon, and Oswald dropped the other guys off, and then he swung over to Oak Cliff and dropped it off at the Tidy Lady Laundrette and walked to the Texas Theater. That's what Oswald did. Okay. Now, another conclusion I've come to is James Files, Mafia CIA, was behind the lowered picket fence. I do believe that. I do believe he fired the frangible shot into JFK, into his right temple. Okay, I do believe Files did that. Although he wasn't behind the fence by himself. I believe that that's not true. That's a lie. He was managed by Frank Sturgis, who was standing right behind him. And I've shown it in my books, a blow-up of that. You can see Sturgis behind Files. Sturgis was managing the entire picket fence operation. That's what he was. He was paid the previous night by E. Howard Hunt at the Dallas Cabana Motel. Frank Sturgis was. So he was there as the manager of Files. Files was just the gunman. Then Files gave the rifle to Sturgis, who ran off the rifle. So that's my conclusion there on the lower picket fence shooter. Also behind the picket fence, Bernard Barker was there, the CIA. He was spotted there walking away afterward, Bernard Barker. And I believe he was a fake Secret Service agent and also a cleanup man. But Bernard Barker was also involved in the hit. He was behind the picket fence, along with Roscoe White, J.D. Tippit, Frank Sturgis, and James Files. Okay. Another revelation we've come to, which is stunning, they didn't know this at first, is there were shooters inside the pergola behind Abraham Zapruder. There's no question there were. Now, some of them may have had silencers. They may all have had silencers, but they were there. We can see them in the enhanced pictures. They definitely were. And actually, Rod McKenzie gave me some other names supplied to him by Malcolm Wallace the week following the assassination of a group of guys who I believe were in the pergola. And that's Clyde Faust and John Ernst of the Dixie Mafia were shooters. And Joe Dugan was a pickup man, picking up shells, and Jack Grimm was a radio man with a radio. And I think that was the crew that was inside the pergola. And they were probably communicating with a command center up on the second floor of the TSBD, was in there, with LBJ's assistant. Cliff Carter was in there, George Reese was in there, and Carlos Marcello was there. And originally Ruby was supposed to be up in there, but I believe he was down walking around in the plaza. But originally, Wallace said Ruby was supposed to be up there in that command center on the second floor of the TSBD, who they were more than likely communicating down to the pergola round behind Zapruder, Jack Grimm with a radio, with Clyde Faust, John Ernst as shooters. Another revelation we have here that we know now is the three tramps were a hit team. They weren't just tramps twiddling their thumbs in the rail yard. They were there for a reason. The tall tramp was Charles Harrelson. He was CIA, Dixie Mafia, and he was a shooter. Okay, he shot by the side of the pergola. We can see him doing it in the Nix film very clearly, and also you can see him in the Mormon photo. He was a shooter, Charles Harrelson. His communications man was Chauncey Holt with a radio. He was probably back behind the pergola, around the corner there. And Charles Frederick Rogers was there, who also may have been a shooter by that pergola round. All these guys were behind Zapruder. Okay, so who is held steady by his secretary, who I'm sure was up there for a reason, because they knew there was going to be shots flying everywhere. So she was holding Zapruder in place so he could get that snuff film, because the conspirators put him up there. They really wanted it. They wanted to review that film afterward to make sure that everyone had done their jobs. Now, another thing we know now is Gordon Novel of the CIA was down in front of the sign with the umbrella, and he pumped it and fired a flechette into the side of President Kennedy's throat. In the side, not the front, in the side, there's a little wound there. I've shown it in my books, a flechette. So Gordon Novel did that. There's no question he did. That was Gordon Novel. We also know Harry Weatherford was a shooter up on the corner of the County Records building, assisted by Gene Sutra, more than likely. We now know Chuck Nicoletti was a shooter. He was CIA Mafia on the second floor of the Daltex building, assisted by Jim Brading, Richard Kane, and John Roselli, who was down in front of the building supplying Danny Arce with a walkie-talkie. And George H.W. Bush was in this area also. Now, we've recently discovered, and I'm going to cover this in some videos next week, and it's in our book Takedown, that the presidential limousine contained a Secret Service CIA hit team, okay? There's no question about it, okay? The shooters were the driver, William Greer, and Jackie Kennedy was a shooter, okay? She was in the back seat. They both shot JFK in the head after the car was stopped by the driver, William Greer, okay? Roy Kellerman was the spotter with the radio in the front passenger seat, and Clint Hill was the cleanup man in the trailing in the Queen Mary. Okay, so this is a big revelation we have now, and I'm going to do some more videos telling you about it. It's in our book, The Limousine Hit Team. When the car stopped, JFK hadn't been hit, and the final hit team, U.S. government sponsored Secret Service CIA hit team kicked in, and they took him out. That's what they were doing. That's why the car was stopped. Okay, it fell on Greer. At that point, if JFK wasn't hit, he had to do it. And Jackie had to do it too. And they did it. They both shot him. And after that final shot came in, Jackie and Greer hit him in 313. Final shot came in 314. And then a number of others came in right after that, maybe, including Roscoe White, no doubt. Okay. Now, we also know, we know now also that J.D. Tippit was killed by the CIA in a premeditated murder, okay, for his corpse to be used as a body double for JFK, okay, as Oswald never went the 10th and Patton at all. They always planned on killing Tippit. They needed a double. JFK's corpse was heavily shot up, and they needed a body double bad. Tippit was planned to be killed from the beginning. There's no question. They put him on Air Force Two. Okay, so J.D. Tippit, actually at 10th and Patton, he was shot by Gary Marlowe of the CIA, 3 shots to the chest, and Roscoe shot him in the head after he was down. So they were both CIA guys. They both shot him. Oswald wasn't even there. There was nobody there in a brown overshirt. He was in the theater, seen by a couple of witnesses. He was never at 10th and Patton at all. There's no question. If they wanted him to go, but he didn't. He didn't meet up with Tippit at the Top 10 Records store like they wanted. Instead, he drove to the Tidy Ladies Laundrette and walked to the theater. Oswald was too smart. If he had met Tippit, the plan was to kill Tippit and Oswald at 10th and Patton. That was the plan. Okay, they were going to use Tippit always as the body double, and they were going to blame Oswald for the Tippit killing too, and then say that he got killed after that. But that was the way that was. Okay, another revelation we've come to now. Actually, the two corpses, JFK and Tippit, they're both loaded on the presidential, vice presidential plane, Air Force Two, and moved into the vice presidential bedroom that LBJ had vacated, and that's where CIA Reconstruction expert John Liggett was there on Air Force Two, and then he mocked up Liggett. Liggett mocked up Tippit as a substitute for JFK. They used him in the autopsies, not in all of it, but when they needed him, they used Tippit, largely from the left side, where Jackie had shot him, because they couldn't show any of that at all. Yeah, Tippit was definitely the double. We even have a photo of it. It's in our book. That was used as an autopsy. They said it was an autopsy photo, but it was on Air Force Two, because we can see Tippit on the bed and JFK in front, and they're both together in the same photo, and you can even see the bed So that was taken on Air Force Two. I'm 100% convinced of it. Okay, so we know that now. We know it. Another revelation we've come to: Richard Nixon was a big liar, which is no surprise. But now we know even more that he was at Murchison Mansion the night before. He signed off on the hit. I'm sure nobody's surprised. And then he was seen afterward at the Dallas Cabana Motel, going into Frank Sturgis's motel room for a half an hour, and obviously going over the final details of the picket fence hit team, and probably reassuring Sturgis they wouldn't be pursued after the hit. Nixon was there. He was witnessed. I've also come to the conclusion Beverly Oliver was definitely the babushka lady. It was her. Okay. There's no question she was filming from the infield. So the totals. We got Malcolm Wallace managed all the hit teams. Okay, according to what he told Rod McKenzie, there were 8. Okay, 26 people total. It included 2 hit women, Ruth Ann Martinez and Jackie Kennedy. There were 9 shooters and 12 shots minimum. Okay. Basically. The CIA managers in Dealey Plaza that day on the ground were George H.W. Bush, the Daltex building, Edward Lansdale, the area of the rail yard, E. Howard Hunt managed Sturgis, although he didn't have to be there, managed the picket fence hit team. E. Howard Hunt was over on Houston Street watching. David Atlee Phillips, we're not sure where he was, but he was there somewhere. Frank Sturgis, who was actually a spotter and ran off James Files' rifle, he was there in the rail yard. John Roselli and David Morales. David Morales was on Houston Street. He had managed... He was the quarterback of the limousine hit team and told Jackie Kennedy how to pull that off. He signaled her as she gave him a hand to the hat as she rounded in the car around Houston Street. John Roselli was in front of the Daltex building. James Files said he was up in there as a shooter, and Ron McKenzie said he was on the telephone, but the photo of Vulcan 6 blown up tells differently. It says Roselli was in front supplying RC with a walkie-talkie. Actually, McKenzie told me that Roselli did have a CIA issue walkie-talkie, so I mean, it sounds to me like that's it. So we have a little bit of disparity there between Files and McKenzie. It would be nice to have a meeting and have them in the same room, and maybe I could be there too, and this could be hashed out, but most likely that's never going to happen. Okay. The assassination was funded by Permandex Corporation, okay, which is an FBI 5 CIA Mossad money laundering entity out of Canada and South Africa. That's how it was largely funded, and then also by the wealthy big oil Texans, no doubt provided plenty of funding, which included Clint Murchison and H.L. Hunt. So anyway, those are my revelations. And as we get closer to the 22nd this year, I'm going to make a couple of other videos detailing our new revelations, go over the shooting in more detail, and the limousine hit team, which is shocking to a lot of people, but we really have a lot of detail. And so I'm going to do my best to lay that all out for you. So anyway, I'll talk to you later. It's Richard Hooke signing off.